Morning, everybody. Thanks, Natasha. I'm Mark Rhodes, and here are some young people, and they're waving their mobile phones around. So I'm not sure if anyone's old enough to remember doing this with a cigarette lighter. Health and safety, eh? What we're going to be talking about today. So read.co.uk, I am not going to talk about very much, other than to say we are who we are, and hopefully you know who that is. We're a fairly well-established brand. We come from a bricks-and-mortar heritage, but we are now a pure-play digital recruitment service. And I say that because we, like you, are challenged in lots of ways, and one of those ways is to be able to connect with a young audience. And so in taking that challenge very, very seriously, we've done a lot of research. We have a program of research specifically aimed at this audience right now, as well as a series of activities around how we develop our products, how we position our brand, how we go out to meet this audience. And a big survey that was done very recently, in fact we got the results of it this week, really sought to understand more about what motivates effectively 16 to 24-year-olds in the kind of career sphere. We got the results of this on Monday, as I said. So this is very fresh. It will be research which feeds into our product development and our positioning. But we thought that this would be an ideal opportunity just to talk to you about some of the kind of headlines there, which may be things that you know already. I'm sure that as accomplished recruiters, you'll have considered many of the topics that we're going to cover. But actually, there might be a few little insights there which will potentially help in terms of your day-to-day and in terms of how you go out, prioritise and communicate with this audience. So 16 to 24-year-olds, there they are. We all know the kind of the stereotypes, the cliches. They're stuck to their phones the whole time. They have a sense of entitlement. They've got no attention span. I probably have all of those traits myself as well. But actually, equally, they want to work really, really hard. They're really interested in social responsibility, and we'll come on to talk about that as well. They earn less than Gen X in terms of average earnings in their 20s. Are about £8,000 less than the equivalent earnings for Generation X, which would be my generation. Many may never own their property, and of course they're digital natives, and that's something that we'll come on to talk about, because that's a really interesting point in terms of the context of how we message to this audience. So, university, clearly we heard from Richard about the extent to which university is still an important element of career choice for young adults. It's still by far and away the most popular career entry point for young people. But rather than just kind of focusing on UCAS for a moment, let's just think about the reality of what that means in terms of debt. So an average of £50,000 of debt is what graduates will incur at the point of graduation. And actually £5,500 of that is just interest already accrued on that debt. So that's a really important point, and it's a really big differentiator, certainly in terms of who is coming out of university now and who was coming out of university a generation ago when there were things called grants available and there weren't things like tuition fees and so on. Apprenticeships, again, we saw some of the great work that Verity told us about, that Travis Perkins and Francesca talked about with Deloitte. The data, however, suggests that there are fewer people doing apprenticeships and there are fewer people entering the workplace in this age group to do apprenticeships than there were 12 months ago. And I think actually this is really a significant point around confusion around the apprenticeship levy. The CIP did some research last summer which said that 22% of employers don't know whether they have to pay the levy or not. So, in spite of the show of hands at the start when Verity asked a question about people's understanding of the apprenticeship levy, actually, as you take this out to the country, there's a lot of confusion still, and actually that's manifesting itself in fewer apprenticeships at this point in time. And so what about everybody else? So we've talked about graduates, we've talked about apprentices, but there's a lot of people not covered in those statistics. The government estimates there are about 800,000 NEETs, and so NEETs are not in education, employment or training, which is higher than the OECD average, so make of that what you will. but there's a hefty amount of the population within this age group who are either contemplating going straight to work, about to go straight into work, or are already at work. And so for you as recruiters, you know, you've got the kind of graduate conversation, you've got the apprenticeship option, and actually you've got to figure out what your priorities should be and how you communicate with each of these different groups to suit your recruitment requirements. And that's really what we hope this research will try to help to address. So we surveyed 2,000 16 to 24-year-olds during February of this year. This wasn't Read.co.uk's audience, so this was an independent panel of 16 to 24-year-olds working with an independent research company. So there's no kind of bias in terms of brand loyalty to Read.co.uk or anything else like that. And really what we sought to understand was three things. One, approach and entry to work. So, you know, what do people do to get into work and how do they start to make those choices? What young people's attitudes are and what aspirations they have when they're looking at career options at the kind of early career stage. And finally, a little bit about what is important to them in terms of attraction and ultimately retention as well when it comes to actually being in work. So we'll just cover off a few of the initial findings. So more than half of young adults told us that their career path will be a university degree. So there's still an aspiration there. And actually, if you think about the kind of almost the kind of socially expected received wisdom, that is that if you have a degree of intellect, if you're in a school which is pushing you to do well, that just inevitably means university. And you know, these choices are made because, you know, there is a sense that qualifications are required for a chosen career. Some people will pursue a passion or a personal interest. And those who are doing a university degree told us that they believe that they'll have more knowledge, that they'll possess specialised skills that wouldn't otherwise be available had they not taken a degree, and that in comparison they will have a wider and more appropriate skill set than the rest of the working population. 16% of adults, young adults, 16 to 24s, told us that they're going to go straight into work. So clearly there is an avoidance of debt here. There is the sense that they will be able to gain experience in order to progress their career and enjoy some financial independence and stability at an earlier age where perhaps their contemporaries are still in university incurring that debt. And actually those who go straight to work told us that they think that they will have a better work ethic as a result of starting work at an earlier age rather than going to university and go through the university system. They'll be able to deal more effectively with workplace pressures and they'll have a wider range of skills. So graduates believe they'll have a wider range of skills, and actually people who go into work believe the same thing too. And then there's that 10% of young adults who will enter an apprenticeship, and we expect this to grow. We've talked about the fact that it's declined on account of this change in the law, or certainly with the levy rather. And people who do an apprenticeship, again, they share this value set with people who go straight into work, who perhaps aren't doing an apprenticeship, around being able to deal more with workplace pressure and have a better work ethic. And just to come back to that point about how we see it growing, I read recently an interview with Capgemini, and they talked about the fact that they expect to be taking on more apprentices than graduates, and that they'll be focusing not just on 16-year-olds, but they'll be focusing on 18-year-olds. And actually, as part of their apprenticeship program, perhaps not dissimilar to some of the stuff that we've heard about already today, they will end with their apprentices getting a degree. So they'll marry up their apprenticeship program with, I think it was Aston University, which means not only do their workforce become educated on account of working for that company, but they're also going to be there for a given period of time, and so there's going to be a certain amount of kind of retention and loyalty there. So that's apprenticeships. And then what about career influences? And again, Richard mentioned when he was talking in the context of Deloitte about parent power. And actually what was perhaps surprising in our research is that in this age group, parents are by far and away the most dominant force in terms of being influencers around early careers decision making, followed by close friends. Teachers don't do terribly well when it comes to influencing, and then peers and siblings further down. So what about finding work? So one of the key important points that we wanted to get from this research as read.co.uk is how we position our brand in order to be able to connect with this audience. So inevitably we want to understand what that journey looks like right now. And so the first question inevitably we ask is, where will you start your search for work? And perhaps gratifyingly for me, as the marketing director of a job board, job boards won out with 61% of the vote, followed by search engines. And actually, you know, I'm not sure that there's too much mutual exclusivity here, you know, and whilst there will be brands that are go-to brands because perhaps they invest in advertising on TV and so forth like we do, equally search engines are super important, and Google tells us, you know, 70 to 80% of job searches start with them, which I wouldn't necessarily challenge. Company websites, you know, this is a brand savvy generation. They will go and seek out the organisations and the brands with whom they want to work or with whom they want to start a career. And then the first kind of analogue medium there is careers fairs, which was interesting to hear Francesca talking about cutting them out of that mix for Deloitte. Again, perhaps unsurprisingly, we talk about this kind of unbreakable bond with our smartphones, and I think for no more generation than 16 to 24-year-olds is this the case. Research says that it's probably 4 to 5 hours a day of constant phone use amongst this generation. And actually some research in the States said that people interact with their smartphones more than any other human being on average now, which is perhaps unsurprising. But, you know, this is the mechanism with which this generation communicates. They've never known any different to being able to do that. They use phones for, you know, making payments, you know, buying stuff, proving their identity, whatever it might be, and actually applying for jobs should be no different. And 3/4 of our sample told us that they apply for jobs on a mobile phone. And I'm sure you're all well aware of the nature of the beast and the challenges it presents, but nevertheless, some substantiating proof there. 63% told us that they would rather not apply with a CV. And so, you know, I've worked in online recruitment probably for 16 years, and I think for all of that time, there has been a constant kind of conjecture and question over the future of the CV. And we've had countless brainstorm sessions where we talk about, you know, what's the alternative to a CV, and, you know, we all know that, and we all have a LinkedIn profile. You know, there are emerging connections between candidates and employers, and some of you may be familiar with Job Today, which is a mobile app-based platform where candidates can connect directly and chat to employers, and actually for certain types of roles that might be the kinds of interactions that certainly that candidates are looking for. And it might be, you know, we can boil it down to the length of a tweet, you know, 140 characters, or an old tweet rather, before they lengthen them, but 140 characters to describe why you're suitable for the job and why you should have your application taken seriously. Interviews, perhaps unsurprisingly, or perhaps surprisingly, face-to-face interviews were very much the preferred medium for meeting recruiters once that application has been made, and more so than group assessments, which people didn't react to and respond to well, particularly men. Video interviews, virtual reality experiences, what have you. Actually, an old-fashioned face-to-face interview was certainly most favoured by our sample and our research, and described as being the most enjoyable. And actually, some of you may have heard me or some of my colleagues talk previously about research we've done into the application process as a kind of customer experience. And we've got data, and there is a fair amount of research on this, which supports the theory that actually if you offer a really solid customer experience like recruitment process, then you will nurture loyalty and gain customers even if you don't hire those individuals. And this is supported by our research. We said actually if this is an enjoyable experience, as well as that kind of advocacy, people might well apply again. So they might kind of go away, improve themselves, come back when there's something more appropriate. They'll make recommendations to their peers, and they'll even follow you on Twitter as well, if they enjoy their experience. So in terms of the generation that we're talking about and what really matters to them in an employer, and I think this hopefully starts to become a bit more practical in terms of the sorts of messages you might want to take out in your recruitment. We asked what the most important factors were when choosing where to apply for a job. So you will all have your EVPs, you'll have your messaging, you'll have your kind of hierarchy of important criteria that you like to talk about. But the most important was, by some margin, work-life balance. And this backs up every piece of research that we've done recently, which is to say that the most important criteria that anybody of any age group looks for is work-life balance. And there are kind of two segments where this is most exaggerated. One is Generation X, or my generation, which tends to be people who have perhaps younger families, or they have a kind of working partner and a young family. So there is a necessity for work-life balance to enable them to support their responsibilities in family and life. But for this generation, actually, it probably means something slightly different, because we talk about this generation being digital natives. They are used to being able to pick up a laptop or an iPad or their phone and doing and being productive wherever they want, whenever they want, not having to go and sit at a desk, and that being, the parameters within which we define our work. Furthermore, I don't necessarily think this is about not going to work because you want to go and play golf or go swimming or whatever it might be. Actually, what it's about some of the softer activities that your employer might be able to offer. So Google, for example, offer massages and music lessons. We at read.co.uk increasingly look at ways in which we can support our people, which aren't necessarily in a kind of traditional academic kind of training way. And it might be, again, we've done kind of massages, we've done kind of boot camps in terms of kind of physical fitness and so forth. And so there's a whole range of things which I think talk to that point about work-life balance. So it's not necessarily about flexible working or flexible hours. Location and convenience, I guess, is fairly obvious. If you're talking about a relatively low salaried segment of the population, then actually knowing that you can get to work without having to pay a fortune to do it is going to be important. Career progression, again, we're talking about early career choices here, and progression is important, followed by training and development. And then perks and benefits, which I think is quite closely allied to the work-life balance thing that I talked about before. Perhaps interestingly, salary doesn't make this top 5, and financial incentives of any sort, be they salary or bonus, doesn't come into the second half, so kind of number 6, and then it gets into kind of culture and leadership and so forth. So those are the most important factors when applying, but we were also quite keen to understand what would put people off, so what those turn-offs look like. And somebody mentioned Glassdoor earlier, and you'll all be familiar with Glassdoor. Equally, you'll probably be familiar with TripAdvisor or Expedia or whatever your kind of platform of choice is, perhaps when you're choosing a holiday, or even a book on Amazon or a DVD, or people don't buy DVDs, whatever people buy on Amazon, everything. Company reviews are inherent in the vernacular for our digital natives, and actually, why would they not go and find out what other people are saying about this employer before they even make the decision to apply? And actually, if they see negative company reviews, why would they bother? Confusing job descriptions. This is an audience who hasn't had time and opportunity to familiarise themselves with the jargon and the vernacular of the recruitment world and all of the terminology that we use when we're talking about recruitment and hiring. Lack of clarity on salary. So it might not necessarily be the number one priority in choosing a company, but if it's not completely clear that they're going to be able to do their sums and work out what they're going to have left at the end of the month, then it's not going to be a very attractive proposition. A disorganised interview process. People want their hands holding, they want to know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And then finally, that lack of benefits. And actually, if you've got a bunch of benefits over here from a company with great reviews, then you're more likely to be shifting that way than the one over here, which doesn't have the benefits, doesn't have the work-life balance, and is getting slagged off by their current employers or whatever it might be. So the definition of a kind of company culture and what that means. So more than half of our respondents told us that a fun and sociable workplace is for them the definition of company culture and what's important. And I suppose who would argue with that? Followed by motivational leadership. So actually, if you've got motivational leaders within your business, whether they're in the talent acquisition team, or whether they're in the commercial team, or whether they're the CEO, actually, if you can expose your new hires and your potential candidates to strong and motivating leaders, then actually this is going to be a real advantage. And actually, after this, a quarter of 22 to 24-year-olds told us that they would choose to work somewhere where mentorship and career coaching were available. So if you have a mentor program, and many of us do within our organisations, then this is a really key selling point for offering that very overt career support at this stage. So you can see in the background there's a little video going from, this is actually from Deloitte, and this is a bit about their story of giving back to the community. And indeed, Reed has its own kind of CSR kind of narrative, I suppose. We are, as an organisation, 18% owned by a charitable foundation, which actually as a message becomes we work 1 day a week for charity. And that's really, really compelling, particularly for this generation. 81% told us that they factor in corporate social responsibility when they choose who they're going to work for, who they would like to work for. And I think the difference is that, this stuff, this responsibility, this sense of doing good, and this sense of working for a kind of socially appropriate organisation is very inherent in this generation. It's something that they learn about at school, and it's something that they're far more aware of than perhaps certainly I would have been when I came out of the education system back when it was. 63% will choose an organisation or favour an organisation based on their social media presence. So again, I keep coming back to the point, these are digital natives, and that your social media is a very kind of open window into your EVP. It's your opportunity to show a bit of wit and a bit of personality digitally. And it's not something which I think necessarily is just desired by this age group. It's just expected. Brands are expected to have a personality, and it is expected, whether you're in recruitment or not, that this personality will be brought to life in social media. And then there were fears. What are the biggest fears when entering work for the first time? And there are three things that really stood out in our research. The first one, and I think this is particularly true for school leavers as opposed to graduates, is this sense that they're underqualified, that they're inexperienced, and therefore they start to question their own value. The second is this sense of stress and actually an impact on mental health. And the third is this sense of not being taken seriously. And I think this kind of translates into a broader sense of the importance of work and the importance of happiness for anybody of this generation when they enter the workforce. So 90% of our sample of 16 to 24-year-olds believe that job satisfaction is closely linked with their happiness. And actually this is, to come back to this phrase, digital natives, this is a very different generation. This is a generation who has grown up with the internet and has grown up with immediate access to information. And actually, they have had to learn to live their lives with everybody watching and judging digitally, which is a huge pressure. This generation suffers greater levels of anxiety than any generation before it. And actually, this plays into a really important role that we have as recruiters and employers in terms of being supportive and offering the right kind of experience, which recognises all of these kind of changing kind of social dimensions. That it's very easy for people of my age and my generation probably either not to understand or not necessarily consider. So that's the serious bit out of the way. So we also asked which organisations people would actually really like to work for. And I'm going to let you make your own judgments on why these brands are the ones that cut through. We run this piece of research on a wider scale every couple of years, and we have done for quite some time. And there's one or two brands who always end up in the kind of top two and they kind of vie for positions. But actually what we've done this time is just take a cut which relates specifically to 16 to 24-year-olds. And so I'm just going to run through your top 5. I won't do the kind of the guessing thing. I might do it towards the end. So that's number 5, so Disney. You will all have your opinions of Disney. We know that at read.co.uk, if ever we do any social media posts about vacancies we're recruiting for on Disney, they are the ones that get shared more than any other brand. You know, everybody has a friend who is a big Disney fan, and this is for them. So good social media fodder. This one I was surprised by. I don't know whether we have anyone in the room from Lush and whether they are able to explain this at all, but this is quite smelly when you walk past, as you know. That's as much as I know, I'm afraid, about these guys. ASOS, again, great digital brand, you know, really part of, you know, our culture now, actually. And I say our, I'm possibly a little bit too old. I certainly didn't get it. Anyway, this one surprises often. It's not necessarily a brand that we think of as necessarily being aspirational in a kind of slavishly kind of hipster cool way, but actually if you study medicine and if you study nursing and if you study anything within the sphere, and it's a huge sphere that the NHS touches, then actually, you know, this is your number one employment choice. This is where you want to go and work, in spite of all of the negative media, in spite of everything we hear. Actually, if you've put those hard yards in and you've worked your socks off to get to where you've got to with your qualifications, actually, this is what you want to go and do. And finally, number 1, anyone want to guess? Shout out. Yeah, obviously. So just worth mentioning, actually, interestingly, Google has never been number 1 when we've done this on a wider age group. And actually, when you factor in slightly older people, they don't say Google. The brand that always comes through is Virgin. And so I think this is quite an interesting insight here about the fact that Virgin doesn't make our top 5 specifically for this age group. So I've talked enough. This is just a very quick summary of some of the points that I've covered. So, you know, work-life balance, career support, well-being, that well-being point, these things really matter. And actually these are things you know, we should be looking at as read.co.uk as a brand which is connecting candidates with employers, and that you guys should be considering when you're communicating with this generation. Keep the recruitment process simple. You know, this is a generation, this is an age group who is not familiar with the complexities and the acronyms and the vernacular and so on, and actually make sure it's clear, make sure it's fully mobile enabled. You know, text people, don't email them, text people, don't phone them, you know, make sure that they know what's going on. It's much more simple that way. Talk about what you're doing that's good, and by that, you know, it's really about corporate social responsibility, you know, what you're doing as an organisation to give back. Apprenticeships are there to complement, you know, your graduate programme potentially, and we've already heard about a bit of that today, and they can really help to tackle skills shortages by developing a kind of homegrown base of talent. And then parent power still matters, and you know, as the father of an 11-year-old, this one surprised me, but even to digital natives, they do occasionally listen. So thanks very much. I don't know if we're doing questions or...
We can do questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great.